All right, welcome everyone. We're going to do paper paintings. That's our project that we're going to work on. And we're going to do these using our Universal Laser Systems laser engravers. And we're going to use colored cut paper, either construction paper or colored cardstock. And the first example I'm going to show us is what if you want to make a paper painting that is based on a photograph, a representational artwork. Um, so here's my usual strategy. I just use a browser, I'm sorry, a search engine, and do the image search for whatever I'm looking for. So cabin with pine trees, I want to find a good image here. Let's say that I wanted to do this one. This is an interesting one. I'm going to open this in a new tab, if I can. Here we go. And I want to see if when I do save image as, it's either a PNG or a JPEG. Sometimes you get web files. Those are not really documents that you're saving on your computer. That's just sort of a hyperlink to a web address. So if it's a JPEG or a PNG, you can save that to your downloads folder or whatever works for you. And then we're going to open Adobe Photoshop, and we're going to open that file that we saved from online. Now, this is the one I'm going to work with. When making this video, I could not find for the life of me this particular image online, but that's okay. Let's just pretend I found this one. So to get this ready to simplify with vectors in Adobe Illustrator, I need to edit this in Photoshop just a little bit. So in adjustments on the right side here, I want to find single adjustments right here, single adjustments, hue and saturation. And I'm going to turn saturation down. Saturation is the measurement of how chromatic something is. So, a pure bright orange, an electrifying orange, that's going to be a really highly saturated orange. But an orange like what I'm looking at here, it's orange, but it's a little gray or it's a little brown, it's a little bit nuanced. That's more of a desaturated orange. Well, I'm going to completely desaturate this image so that it appears just black and white. I'm then going to, also in layers here, you see I've got my background layer, which is the image, and then right on top of that is another layer, hue and saturation. So it accounts right here for the adjustment that I just made. And when you're making adjustments like this in Photoshop, you want to be very mindful of the order that your layers appear. Let's say that I move this layer on top of that hue and saturation layer. It's no longer being affected by that. So these adjustment layers, they affect things beneath them. So as long as the order is like this, it'll remain black and white. Okay, I'm going to make another adjustment here. And this time I want, let's see. Posterize. So I'm going to change the levels in posterize to 3. And that is what I want. I want the smallest number of values that I can manage. Although this seems like more than 3. Let me see here. Let me undo this. Okay, there we go. All right, if I make sure that the posterize layer is on top, I've got black, middle gray, and white. So just 3 values, and that's exactly what I want. So, okay, that's all I need to do in Photoshop. So I'm going to go to File, Export As, and I'll save it as a JPG in a location that I'm familiar with. Okay, so I've saved this image here as a JPG, and I'll open it in Adobe Illustrator. When I have it open in Adobe Illustrator, I want to start thinking about these regions of value. So black, gray, or white. I want to think about these regions as closed shapes. If I can manage it, I might not be able to do this entire black region that begins here and sweeps around the bottom and then covers all of this central area and then winds up on the top right. I might not be able to do all of that in one shape, but even if I can do most of it as one shape, or a couple really big black shapes, that's fine. So what that would look like is, oh, I should mention this too. It's important that when you're using the pen tool in Illustrator to outline these shapes, that you can see very clearly that pen tool stroke path. So the way to do that is your image layer, which is probably the first layer that you start with. If you click on this little gray circle on that layer, you should have in properties, in appearances, fill and stroke, which we're already familiar with from using these laser cutters. Right under stroke is opacity. So if you turn opacity down, you can still see those different regions of value, but they're not as severe. So okay, I've already done some of this work. You can see this stroke path is following, to the best of my ability, regions of, oh gosh, I keep accidentally dragging my image away. Regions, basically the division between black and gray is what I'm drawing against. So every region where black and gray separate, I'm creating a shape there, a closed shape, if I can help it. Let me turn this layer off and then start addressing on a new layer the white shapes so that we can see how the pen tool works. I know for newer users in Illustrator, the pen tool is kind of a tricky thing. I want to make sure once I equip the pen tool that I turn my fill off. So here in Appearance, I'm going to turn the fill off. And the stroke color, I actually want this to be something other than black right now so that I can see it very clearly. So I've already covered the divisions between black and gray. That's what all these other shapes are here. And now I want to start doing the divisions between gray and white. And while you're doing this, by the way, if the other stroke paths are distracting, you can turn your layers on and off with the eyeball button. Okay, so if I start this path with a single click and then do another single click, I get straight lines between each of these anchor points. However, if let me delete that. If I click once to start my first anchor point, and then the second point I hold click, you can see now the pen tool is setting me up to produce some curvature in this line with the Bezier curve. So if I keep, if I need a rounded stroke, holding click as I walk around this shape will preserve some of that roundness. And then if I deselect this and get a better look, yeah. And let me delete this and do it one more time, but this time I'm going to have a mixture of straight and curved lines. So a single click and a single click here. I'm just taking an average. You can see all the pixelation because of how the posterize effect in Photoshop works. It's very pixelated. You lose a lot of the quality, but you reduce it to just simple areas of value. That's kind of what we want. So a single line and then another curve, and then I can probably just cover this straight away right here. Then maybe another single line here. I mean a single line. I'm thinking in Rhino terms now. A straight line, that's what I mean. And then, okay. So for each shape here, this is how I'm going to do it. Oh, and I want to be sure, by the way, I made this mistake. I don't know how this happened, but I'm working on my image layer right now. That's no good. I have to be working on layer 4 or layer 2 or 3 or whatever your empty layer is. So I have to now, using the selection tool, I have to grab this line and delete it because I put it on the wrong spot. I'll build this real quick. And remember, these are going to be on 8.5 by 11 cardstock. I'm zoomed in a little bit here. What I have now is probably a little closer to how the page is really going to look. So keep this in mind. These shapes don't have to be really precise. Zooming in is just so that I can better manipulate the pen tool. It's not to, you know, be excessively accurate. All right, you may have some little amorphous, very small shapes there. You can approximate those with the ellipse tool or a rectangle tool if you prefer. It's a quicker tool to use, and I gotta remember, I'm only looking for the boundaries between white and gray right now. So, oh, this is what I want. Okay. And let me do maybe one more. Let me do maybe something up here a little bit. I can tell that these are pine trees, even though they're very pixelated and it's just a rough impression of the pine trees. So I can be kind of liberal in how I address all these divisions between white and gray. Just approximate. An approximation is plenty. Our paper paintings, they can turn out with representational qualities. They can be, slightly illusionistic, but they don't have to be precise. And this is an exercise, by the way, that we try this out once and see if the combination of design platforms and machines, if this is able to produce things that we think are, interesting or clever, then That's the value in the exercise. So this region I'm working on here, I would basically circle all the way back around until I'm just going to kind of zip through this last bit here. Really generalizing now. I would probably come back to this and edit things a bit more. Let's say that you do start moving a little fast and you want to maybe redo, adjust some things you were working on. If you hold on Windows Control and then click and drag, you can move these anchor points around to be a little more dynamic. You've also got an anchor point tool somewhere. Where is that? It's here somewhere. Here we go. So the anchor point tool can transform just standard anchor points between straight lines into these Bezier, adjustable Bezier curve handlebars. Gosh. Let's see. Okay. Look, what's happening to me right now will happen to all of us, and it's not worth worrying about. I can always, I'm trying to turn this back into the Bezier curve handlebar so that I can readjust the quality of that curve. I'm not having a lot of luck, so what I'm going to try and do now is just walk back to this point and with pen tool, there we go. So at this point, I've got my pen tool. I've got some of these curves. There we go. Holding Control on Windows, it's probably holding Command on Mac OS, will let you adjust the character of these curved lines. All right, and then you want to always finish in the same spot that you started to get a closed curve. Why does that matter? Because when the laser cuts around this path, it'll be one solid piece. And of course, you can do this the way that you want to do it, but if you have one piece of paper instead of 10,000 little tiny pieces of paper, that's a lot easier to deal with. I'm looking basically at a stack of papers. The closest to my face is black. That is the first piece of paper I see. And the black piece of paper is going to have all of these shapes cut away so that I can look through these shapes like little tiny windows. So this will be a window. On the other side of that window is a different color piece of paper. And it doesn't have to be black, white, gray. It'll be colors with different values. And it's up to you how to deal with color and value. But I think with images, if your values are there, your image is there. And the color is sort of a great bonus. All right. So at this point, I would save as. I want to save it to my computer in a familiar file location as an Adobe Illustrator document. And I'll save this to the Google Drive or email it to myself so I can pull it up on the computers in the classroom. And then because we're going to cut these designs on multiple pieces of paper, if I let's say I want to cut just the first piece of paper, my darkest value. First, I want to be sure to turn off my image layer. So I want to hit the eyeball, turn that off. And this is just going to be what we cut. And as always, the Universal Laser Systems laser engraver requires a few settings. Stroke weight has to be adjusted to 0.001. And because we're cutting on paper, I think it would be best to use blue or red vector color, 255 for either of those, and then 0 for the others. So it'll be very, very faint. I'm working from home right now on this tutorial, so I can't pull up UCP. But in UCP, I would specify that it's construction paper, give that a very small material thickness, and adjust the exhaust fan from 100% to maybe 78 or 79% pressure. That way, you can just slip your paper in the machine and the fan speed will be low enough to where it's not blowing everything around, you know. Otherwise, you'd have to tape your paper to a piece of wood, and it's a whole lot of extra work to do it that way. All right, let's say that designing things in Adobe Illustrator is not for you and you would rather do it in Rhino. Let's look at Rhino and see how we would do this. I'm going to use in Curve Tools, Rectangle Corner to Corner, an 8.5 by 11 rectangle. This is representing my material boundary. And then I'm going to use the picture command. Here's our black and white picture of the cabin. And it's not quite the right dimension, but that's fine. I'll probably just leave it like that so I have more black paper on the right. With the Curve Interpolate Points tool, and let me change layers to something else. I'll use a very bright vector color. I do this, by the way, in layers. So the layers panel has, if you can see it, this red, white, and blue icon. And defaultly, you should have a couple layers all ready to go. If you double click on one of these layers, you'll start drawing in whatever color is assigned to that layer, and you can change colors by just clicking on that box and then adjusting this color picker to something useful. All right, so let me get rid of this curve and start doing this here. Interpolate points. I'm going to select the division between black and gray, and I'll do this all the way across this division, and I can be as precise as I want, or I can generalize. It is helpful to generalize with this. You know, it's first of all, if this were perfectly exact, it wouldn't contain any of our, you know, creative choice. You know, even leaving room for little mistakes is a form of being creative with something. And all these different jagged shapes there, I don't need to account for all of that. I can skip over parts if I want to. I'm just going to generalize. And I'm looking for just the boundary between black and gray. And there's kind of a floating island of black versus gray right here. I'll come back and I'll do a separate shape for that one. That'll be one of those little windows that we're looking through to see the next piece of paper on the other side. And let's say that you've got, you know, as you're tracing around, you come to one of these moments where suddenly it goes from curvature to something really, really straight. I can right click to momentarily stop generating this line and then switch over to either a single line or a polyline, which is instead of one single line segment, this tool, the polyline, will allow you to, for example, create a straight line here, but continue generating the line with additional and uninterrupted, well, just, you can keep clicking and the line will continue making. With single line, so I start the line here and want to come over this way. Well, now that's done. I have to right click if I want to re-engage single line. So the better strategy here is just to switch over and use polyline. All right. So this is another way that you can acquire those closed shapes. And of course, we'll select all of those lines when we're done. You can keep the image if you want as you export things, but I think it's probably better just to export your vectors. And our procedure for that is we're going to select everything first, and then we're going to go to File, Export Selected, and generally I've advised this to us in class. Generally, I do AutoCAD Drawing Exchange.dxf, but a student actually brought this to my attention, and this is really clever. We're going to open and edit all this stuff in Adobe Illustrator anyway, so you can just export it as an Adobe Illustrator file too. Both ways generally work fine, so it's completely up to you. You'll export, and then you'll bring that back into Adobe Illustrator, and then continue with your, adjusting stroke weight to 0.001 and the stroke color. All right, that is the design side anyway. That is how we're going to accomplish these paper paintings. And before I end here, let me I had an example of something not representational, because not everybody is interested in representational artwork, and by that I mean things like landscapes, portraits, pictures of places and things that look like real places and things. Not everything in the world has to be that way. If graphics, graphic design, logos, communication design ideas are more what you're interested in, try doing something with text. You can generate text in Rhino or Illustrator. You can work with geometric shapes. The objective is still going to be, how can we layer a bunch of different colored paper so that we see a really compelling design on the other side of that. And I think I've got a couple examples here of, oh gosh, let's see. Let's see. 3D printing. Okay, here's one, although I know I've got a stash somewhere else. These are two pieces of paper, black and white. The vectors, let me make this a little bit bigger, are drawn around the front profile of Jeep. I would imagine it's a Jeep anyway. And yeah, some of these structures on the yellow paper are incredibly fine, but I think that's one thing that makes this kind of exercise really exciting. All right, have fun. Send me an email if you need any help. I'll be in our classroom on Monday. and I hope you all have a good weekend.